Hi, my name is Beth Tyson. Welcome to my webinar on helping children live with ambiguous loss. Today, you'll be learning what ambiguous loss is and how to help the children that you know who are struggling to cope with it. I'm the owner of Beth Tyson Trauma Consulting, and a great way to learn more about me is to visit my website, bethtyson.com. Before we get started, there's a few things I'd like to share with you. The content and the video of this presentation is protected by copyright law, and it is not legal to record or recreate or redistribute any of this material without my written permission. So just make sure that you're following those guidelines, and if you have questions, feel free to email me at beth@bethtyson.com. This is also not a substitute for professional mental health advice or guidance in any way, and this presentation is for educational purposes only. If you or a child you know needs help or is in crisis, you can contact the new crisis hotline at 988, and this is available to you via text or call for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. By taking this webinar, you agree that I'm acting as a trainer and an educator, and I'm not giving medical, legal, or financial or spiritual advice of any kind. So those are just a few things I like to remind people of before we get started today. As I mentioned before, I am a childhood trauma consultant. I'm also a former trauma therapist who worked with children in foster, kinship, and adoptive families. Oftentimes, these children were on the verge of being removed from their homes due to behavioral issues. And I found that the most powerful impact I made and the most change I was able to see in the families was when I helped the adults understand childhood trauma and how they could parent from a trauma-informed lens. I decided to take that knowledge and all that great experience that I gained and turn it into a consulting business where I teach others and educate and guide organizations and other adults on how to be trauma responsive, trauma aware, and healing centered. I'm also a 3-time best-selling author, which sounds weird to even say, but I wrote a children's book called A Grand Family for Sullivan, and you can find it on Amazon or my website. And there's also 2 other books that I was a co-author of. So I co-authored a book called Where Social Work Can Lead You. It's about the journeys into, out of, and around social work careers. And it's great for anyone who's interested in going into social work or social work students who want to know more about the career options that they have. I'm also a CASA Advisory Board member, and I'm a volunteer for them as well in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. And I'm a HEAL PA co-chair of the Child Abuse Prevention Team with my lovely co-chair, Leslie Davila. Those are just a few of the things I do in my free time. But when I'm not doing that, I love to do this. I love to teach others about children's mental health, grief, loss, and trauma, because I truly believe it's where we can make the most impact in the world. Once we can begin to heal from the pain that we've experienced in early childhood, then we can begin to grow and thrive and succeed as healthy adults. I encourage you to take a picture of this slide if you want to stay in touch with me after watching this webinar. My email is there, as well as my website and my Facebook group, Emoda Minds. My LinkedIn page, Beth Tyson, I'm very active there, have over 10,000 followers. And my Facebook business page, Beth Tyson Trauma Consulting, I also have over 10,000 followers there, and which is remarkable for me to even hear myself say, but I am very proud of the work and the information that I share there. And so I hope you'll hop over and visit me there. I'd love to stay in touch. Today's agenda will be going over how to understand ambiguous loss. This is very unusual for a lot of people, and I wouldn't be surprised if you've never heard the term ambiguous loss. It's not something that most people ever come across or hear about unless they're in the field of loss and grief. And it's a word that can give us a lot of comfort and validation for what we experience during this type of loss. We'll also talk about the impact it makes on our bodies, our minds, our hearts, and our souls. And we'll talk about how we support children with ambiguous loss, a very difficult situation for young people to be in. It's a sense of just feeling completely out of control and uncertain about the loved ones in your lives and the special people, places, and things that you can't reach or are not available to you or to the child. So, what is ambiguous loss? It's any loss that is unresolved, uncertain, and ongoing. So this is a very complicated type of loss. And Pauline Boss, who is the originator of the concept, says that it's the most traumatic type of grief we can experience as a human because of the uncertainty, because of the lack of social recognition, and because of the lack of closure around these types of losses. It's also a framework for understanding grief that doesn't involve death. So we're not talking about physical death. We're talking about losses where a person is still here on this planet, but is either physically or emotionally unable to be present with you or the child. And this experience of ambiguous loss is not pathological. It's not a diagnosis either. It is a normal human response to overwhelming events. So everything we talk about today will be an adaptive response to overwhelming situations. And there is nothing wrong with you or the child for feeling what they're feeling and for having these responses. It's literally a reaction to something that is totally out of their control. There are two types of ambiguous loss. The first type is a physical absence with a psychological presence. That might be, like I mentioned here in parentheses, residents. What I mean there is like people who live in any type of residential facility, for children who are in foster care, for people who are living in separation from their biological family members in some way, physically. That could be a group home or a foster home. And what this means is that the person is physically absent from the person's life or the child's life, but is still very much psychologically present in the child's life. So the child is still thinking about them, still wondering about them, still worrying about them, and still caring about them. They just don't have any access to their physical relationship, meaning mom or dad or whoever it might be that they're missing isn't spending time with them in proximity to themselves. They're not having that time of face-to-face connection. Type 2 is a psychological absence with a physical presence. So this might look like a family where the parent or parents are addicted to substances. So they are physically in the home with the child or children, but they are mentally, emotionally, and psychologically absent because when they're using, they aren't able to be present and connecting on an emotional level in the way that a child needs and deserves. So those are the two types that we will focus on today and that Pauline Boss has explained to us as the definition of ambiguous loss. Some everyday types of ambiguous loss. The first one is physical absence with a psychological presence. And the second one is type 2, a psychological absence with a physical presence. So this might be a parent or a caregiver or loved one who's suffering with substance abuse or mental health issues and is physically still involved in the person's life or your life or the child's life, but they are not emotionally or mentally present in order to maintain a healthy relationship with you. This can even be something as simple as a parent who is constantly staring at their phone and occupied with work and other things instead of paying attention to their child can then feel a sense of loss where they're longing for more connection with their parent or their caregiver, but they're just unable to reach them because they're always preoccupied with other things. So this doesn't have to be like a major traumatic event to still impact people. There's everyday types of ambiguous loss. So we experience these things just throughout everyday life. So there's nothing unusual about this. It's just an unusual word that we use to describe it. But we have all types and children do as well. So there's been many losses due to the pandemic that we just all have been through and are still going through. And so that could look like losses of rituals and ceremonies. Many children lost access to having birthday parties and celebrations or graduations and different things that they would have normally had, and that's a loss. Going to school can even be a type of ambiguous loss for children who are feeling very anxious about being away from their caregivers. For example, if your child has a really hard time going to school in the morning, that's a type of ambiguous loss. They're longing to be with you, they're longing to be at home, but they are unable to. They're unable to reach you. You're unreachable. Again, nothing wrong with this. This is something that happens just throughout life. It can create anxiety. It can bring up big emotions. A breakup or a divorce is something we commonly experience throughout life that can be really difficult. And I think one that everybody can identify with, that boyfriend that we broke up with in our teens or 20s that we still think about, that type of thing, that's normal. And that's a type of grieving. Just because relationships end doesn't mean that our feelings and our emotions end at that point. Sometimes they continue on for longer periods of time. So again, moving to a new community or even a pet who runs away or is missing can be another type of loss, ambiguous loss that children grapple with. A parent who has a miscarriage, empty nesters, those people who are children are going off into the world and they're no longer in the home every day. That can be a type of loss, and the loss of a beloved toy or special item. So these are all different types of things that we normally don't ritualize or have any public or social acknowledgement of, but that can cause grief. I'd like to talk specifically about the loss in foster and kinship care families, because this is the area that I specialize in, and I know that many of you are interacting with or caretaking for children either in foster care situations or in kinship care. And kinship care is when a grandparent or another relative raises a child because their biological family or parent is unable to, due to many different circumstances. So I just like to define that. And I also call them a grand family. Grand families are a beautiful word to encapsulate what they are. And I think it just is a nice way to refer to them. And I've heard the same from actual grand families who appreciate that as well. So what do children lose when they are in foster and kinship care? Lots of things. They may lose their home community, their neighborhood, their friends on their street. They may lose their school community, the teacher that they love, the school counselor they're used to talking to. They may be separated from their siblings. They may not have the ability to stay in the same home. And so maybe they are separated from them physically and emotionally. They may lose their role in the family. And this is something that often gets overlooked when we talk about children moving into new families and new family dynamics, is that the child may have been the oldest in their biological family, and now they're being moved into a family structure where they're the youngest or maybe the middle child. And that loss of the role in the family can bring up a lot of confusion and grief and misunderstandings, especially if it's a oldest child going to the youngest child role. That oldest child may have been taking care of and providing discipline or guidance to younger children in the home. And now they're in a role reversal where they're the youngest and they may be having older children telling them what to do. And that can create a lot of conflict. So when we have empathy and understanding of how that role has changed for the child and how that's a loss for them, we can work together to find collaborative answers and solutions that sort of make it a win-win for everybody, instead of just why are they fighting me so much on this, or why are they fighting so much with their older sister? It could be that they're in a different role now in the family and they need time to re-identify a new role and find a new place in the family. So they may also lose access to their cultural activities and different things that they participated in. If they're moved into a different family with a different culture, they may lose access to all those things that they're used to. And of course, rituals. They may lose their routines and their daily rituals and the things that they're used to. And that can be very unsettling and create a lot of anxiety as well. Let's see. And then we have things, again, like toys, clothing, pets, maybe that favorite pair of sneakers got left behind. But oftentimes I hear from children and families that the kiddos leave their biological homes or families and they have nothing with them except maybe a couple of things to wear. And that's a lot. That's a lot of loss. And who's acknowledging that? Who's pointing that out? Who's giving them a space to cry for that? So why does all this matter? Why are we talking about this? What are some of the impacts that this type of loss has on children? First of all, it's an invisible trauma, and it's one of the most painful types of trauma and loss. And Pauline Boss, who I encourage you to study and research and look up her books, she has many. If you Google her, you'll find her. And she calls this the most painful type of grief, because there is no acknowledgement, there is no closure, and there is no validation for what children are feeling. And when you don't have any validation for what you're experiencing, it becomes very disorienting and anxiety producing. We often see symptoms of post-traumatic stress associated with ambiguous loss because of the uncertainty and because of the longing that continues after the separation takes place. Yes, so a couple of questions. Pauline Boss sorry, somebody had a question. Oh, I don't know if I can, let me see if I can reply. I'm going to reply directly. I'm looking at the chat and I'm seeing some questions come in. I will try to answer them as I go along. And okay, sorry. So it also explains behavior. So you might not understand a child's behavior and why they're acting out so much and getting into trouble at school, or maybe they're really withdrawn and they're hiding in their bedroom a lot and just being avoidant of relationships. If you've experienced this type of loss, it explains a lot. It's something we should rule out when we notice that a child has behavioral issues in school or in the home or in the community. Let's talk about what losses have they had? Are we addressing them? Have they been acknowledged? Is there any way for them to talk about this loss? Children don't come to you and say, hey, I'm really grieving from this ambiguous loss I'm experiencing. They don't have the language for it. Nobody has taught them that. So they will not talk about it unless you talk to them about it and give them a space to grieve what's been taken from them. So it can explain a lot of behavior. And that's why I always encourage people to look into the losses that the child has experienced, even if it's not a death, but it could be one of these more ambiguous types of loss. Learning also becomes impaired when children are in conflict in their mind and in this constant state of tension and anxiety where they're wondering whether or not they're going to see their parent again. That can be extremely activating in your nervous system, and it makes it difficult to focus on things like homework and following directions and creating healthy relationships, because their brain is all tied up thinking about, when am I going to see mom again? Is she okay? Is dad coming back? These are big questions that these children are struggling with, and they don't have any answers. And that just creates an inability for the mind to rest. There's no place for the mind to settle and say with certainty that anything might happen. And that's just the nature of the situation. There really aren't answers a lot of times for these losses. And why does it hurt so much? Why do we have such a strong reaction to these types of losses? As I've mentioned already, there's no social acknowledgement, there's no ritual, there's no ceremony, and there's no ability to say goodbye a lot of times. And you'd be surprised at how powerful that can be. I know from my own experience with ambiguous loss throughout my life that unknown, that question of when am I going to see this person again, can really be difficult to live with. And when you don't have anyone else around you giving you some empathy or compassion for that, it's extremely lonely. It's very lonely. It also hurts because of family loyalty. Oftentimes, children who are living with other family members still hold a deep connection to their biological parents, no matter what has taken place, because that's just an innate desire that all humans have to know and be connected with the people that gave us life. And so they may feel a very strong amount of loyalty to their birth or biological families, and that can make it difficult for them to attach to the new environment that they're in. It can make it difficult for them to let go of the past and try to move on into their future with new relationships and new caregivers. So this is something that you want to be sensitive about. And even though you might not understand why they still feel love or care or concern for their biological family members, that's just something that's inside all of us. We all long to know and be connected to those who gave us life. So having some empathy and understanding for that. And that creates the hope for reconnection. There's always that shred of hope is always there, that maybe things will work out, that maybe mom will stay sober, that maybe dad will get out of jail or get out of prison sooner. There's always this hope that they're living with. And as long as that shred of hope is there, it's really hard to let go. We talked about this earlier, but I have to say it again because I just think it's such an important and often missed issue in families who are struggling with ambiguous loss is that family role. The role the child has in the family of origin doesn't just disappear because they go into a new family dynamic. And you need to honor that and have respect for who they were in their previous families so that we're not only have they lost everything and they've lost their home and they've lost their relationships that were very important to them, but now, they've even lost what they do on a regular basis and who they are and how they see themselves as a person within a family. And then, of course, others sometimes, not always, but sometimes expect children in these situations to be just grateful that they were removed from a bad situation. And that can be really painful for a child because it's hard to be grateful for losing your family, no matter how terrible it was. You always wish that it had been different. And so when we expect children just to be better off now because they are separated from their biological family does not mean, or their parents does not mean that they are going to feel grateful for that. They're going to be grieving and they're going to still want a relationship most of the time with their biological parents. The psychological impact that it creates is a sense of grief limbo or frozen grief. And that's a term coined by Pauline Boss. Again, there's her name at the bottom if anybody wants to look her up. She came up with this term because that's how it feels. You're very stuck. You can't move on. You can't go back and fix the past. And you also don't feel like you can move forward with your life because there's all these unanswered questions. If you think that there's a chance that somebody might be coming back, how do you start to develop deeper relationships with the people around you? Your loyalty to that person may hold you back from being able to do that. And so it's this frozen and stuck feeling. It confuses the decision-making processes. Should I take this job? Should I move here? Should I play sports? Should I go to this party? What if mom comes home that night? It makes it difficult to organize your future when you're constantly questioning whether or not this person will suddenly re-enter your life. It inhibits the grief process. So there is a difficulty with grieving if you're not sure whether or not a person is alive or whether or not a person is coming back into your relationship. So there is no grief process that can really unfold when you have such uncertainty. And these feelings can lead to despair and sometimes even in the worst case scenarios, suicide or taking your own life. So it is important to make sure that if you hear a child speaking about not wanting to live anymore or giving up or saying things like, I just wish I were dead or I might as well be dead, take those comments very seriously and talk to them about it and know that it's normal when someone is under duress and under a tremendous amount of stress to feel as though they can't go on anymore. And you can explain that to them and normalize that to them because they may be feeling a lot of shame for even having that thought. So when you bring it to light and this happens, sometimes people have these thoughts and these feelings when they're really feeling hopeless and that's okay, but let's get you help. Let's make sure that doesn't happen. You deserve to have your life. You deserve to be here and we want you here and let's get you the help that you need. But if you can normalize it a little bit for them, that takes some of the shame away from the feelings they're having. And of course, it creates the anxiety about the future, which I mentioned earlier. It's just very difficult for your nervous system to settle and to feel content when you're questioning the world around you. This type of trauma, especially in early life, impacts the brain and nervous system. It can create developmental delays, which means the child may not accomplish certain typical developmental tasks at the same rate as other children do that don't have this type of loss. They may vacillate between a hyper and a hypo state of arousal. Hyper arousal means that you're very alert and you're always seeking out and looking for threats around you and you're feeling very unsafe and you notice every little detail and every little thing and you feel as though those things might hurt you or be harmful to you even though they're not. And then the hypoarousal state is this state of shutdown where your nervous system goes dormant because you just can't handle what's going on around you. You're so overwhelmed that you are unable to cope with being even in the present moment. So you may not remember things. The child may not remember things. This can look like a child who's very forgetful, or who doesn't listen, or who doesn't follow directions. They might really not be hearing you because they are in a state of shutdown. So this can cause a lot of problems at school and within families if we don't recognize it. There's also attachment difficulties, and that is obvious because they're still very much attached or bonded with their biological parent. And it makes it very hard to move on and attach to a new caregiver when there's that sense of hope that mom or dad or whoever it might be coming back into their life. It also creates cognitive impairments with judgment, logical thinking, analytical thinking, and having a clarity and an understanding of what steps to take next. And then there's also mood swings and emotional dysregulation. It might be aggressive outbursts, crying, sadness, panic, fear. There's all different types of emotional reactions you might see. And of course, sleep disturbances, very common. It's hard to sleep when you have all these questions swirling around in your mind. You might see, like I said, crying, seeking sensory intake or sensory input, or avoiding sensory input. You may have children who are shutting down, have forgetful behavior, emotional outbursts, bodily complaints, or oppositional behavior. The oppositional behavior isn't because they are just feeling like they want to be stubborn. There's a purpose to it. It gives them a sense of feeling in control over something. So even little things can become a control battle. And what's important to recognize there is that so much control and certainty has been lost here for the child in these situations. And because they have so little control and so little certainty, they feel that they need to control whatever they can. And so they will get into control battles with you, and they will make the decisions for themselves and push back on things that don't even make sense at times. And so I just want to encourage you that if you're seeing a lot of oppositional behavior, there's a reason for it. It's an adaptation to the stress that they're under. And it's not that they're a troubled child or a bad kid or any of those labels, but it's that they're struggling with something emotionally, with feeling emotionally out of control. And so they try to control the environment around them. One thing we can do to help children in these situations is practice active listening with them. And that sounds really simple, but it's harder than you think. And I encourage you to try it today after school, or tonight, or if you're with the child today, then obviously today. And what is really just listening to understand and not to respond. So you won't be listening thinking, oh, what should I say next? Or here's how I'm going to say here's what I'm going to say back. Really just listen to take in everything they're saying and hold off any responses that you might have. And then the next step would be to reflect exactly what you hear. So it might say, it sounds like you're really sad about your mom. And just reflect and stop there, and don't try to add on or give guidance or suggest advice, but just reflect exactly what you hear. And don't try to fix it or problem solve, because there are no solutions to this type of loss. The truth of it all is that you really miss your mom. And at the same time, you can't be with her. That's the reality. That's the truth. And we have to get tolerant, or find a way to be tolerable with this experience. It's not going to be solved. And we're such a problem-solving culture that doesn't sit well with us. We're like, no, we need to fix this. We need to find a solution. And that's just part of who we are in our country and in our Western society anyway. I know I have some people here from different parts of the world, so I don't want to assume that everybody here feels that way. But where I live in the United States, we are fix-it people. You solve problems, and this problem can't be solved. There's just sometimes you have to be present with this pain and not try to fix it. The good news is there's a lot of power in your relationship with the child. So there's research by Harvard University and the developing child about how all it takes is one loving adult to mitigate the impacts of trauma and loss. There's also a new story, or a new set of research about PCEs, which are called protective childhood experiences. And those experiences are all about belonging and helping the child feel as though they are accepted and part of their community, part of their family, and that they have supportive loved ones also around them that they feel that they can trust and feel safe with. And when children have these experiences, even with just one person, they are able to manage the trauma that they've been through. And so this is my hope for you, is that if you're listening today, is that you can be that one person for the child. You can be that person who's compassionate, who gives them space to grieve, who brings up these losses with them and says, hey, it must be really hard to not have your mom here on your birthday. It's very important that they have at least one person that they feel that they can turn to and talk to. And those relationships are what heal trauma. It's not therapy. It's not, although it can help, it's not necessarily some strategy or skill. It's this trust and the safety that they have in at least one adult relationship. I'd like to share a short video with you, and I hope the audio works. If it doesn't and you can't hear it for some reason, please let me know in the chat. I can get your chat messages, but the chat itself is closed down because for privacy reasons. But this video is by Josh Shipp, and if you haven't ever seen him speak, he is phenomenal. And I think you'll really be inspired by this short video. It's only a few minutes, but it captures exactly how just one person can be really positive influence on a child who's been through trauma and loss. So I will start that. I do want to warn you that there is a sentence or two about both suicide and sexual abuse. It's just 2 sentences, but I like to warn people that he does say those words. And so if you'd like to turn off your volume or step away for this portion of the presentation, you're welcome to. This video is about 4 to 5 minutes.
As a kid, I mastered the art of getting kicked out of foster homes. And the fact of the matter is I trusted no one. And looking back, how could I? From the time my parents left me, to the time another foster kid raped me, to the time I was bullied so bad, I tried to kill myself with a bottle of pills. So I'm sitting in the van, in the driveway of this next home, preparing to meet Rodney and Christine from Yukon, Oklahoma. He looks in my eyes and says, son, you can keep causing problems, you can keep trying to mess up, you can keep pushing us away, you can keep trying to get us to kick you out of here, but you've got to get it through your thick head, son. We don't see you as a problem. We see you as an opportunity. Every kid is one caring adult away from being a success story. March 2015, Harvard's National Scientific Council on the Developing Child released this study saying, and I quote, every child who winds up doing well has had at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive adult. My friend and mentor, Reggie Joyner from Atlanta, taught me to think about it this way. In this jar are 936 marbles. Each one of these marbles represents a single week from the birth of a kid until that kid turns 18 years old. A 16-year-old, you got 104 marbles remaining. Right here, we are looking at time. In fact, you're looking at all the time or all of the weeks you have left to influence this kid or this kid before they turn 18 and begin making critical life decisions without your presence. What matters isn't how much time you have left with a particular kid that you care about. What matters is what you do with that time left. I mean, consider how many weeks Rodney had left when he bailed me out of jail. 26. I was 6 months away from graduating high school. 26 weeks to get through my thick head, my bitterness, my anger, my distrust of adults, to get me to finally accept help. It's not about how much time you have left with that kid you're thinking of. What matters is what we do with that time. If every kid truly is one caring adult, one Rodney away from being a success story, then the challenge is this. The difference between a statistic and a success story is you.
Oh, that video, it gives me chills every time. So I hope that it was meaningful to you. let me get back into my thing here. 1 second.
As a kid,
How do I get back to my presentation screen? Here we go. Okay. Can everyone still see me and see my slides properly? I know it can get a little wonky after a video is played. So let's see. Getting lots of yeses. Thank you guys. Thanks for letting me know you're there too. I'd love to hear what you thought of the video and any thoughts you're having about the presentation as well as we're going along. And if I have time, I'll hopefully answer a few questions at the end. And I see people are saying they loved the video, getting hearts and saying it was brilliant. So I'm so glad to hear that. You can still see my tabs. Okay, I'll try. I don't want to take too much time and mess with it because I want to make sure I get all the information I have for you. Let's see. Maybe if I stop sharing and reshare again, that'll probably work. Okay, good enough. I'll have to just go with what I have. So how do we help children connect? How do we help them make this connection to that one person? And how do you connect to a child who might be suffering with this type of trauma and loss? The first thing we do, and I've talked about it a lot already, is to help them identify their losses. They don't have language for the losses they've experienced. So, maybe it's making a list of all the important things that have been lost and coming up with some sort of ritual or some sort of practice that you can do either each day or once a week to acknowledge those losses. Giving them the permission to grieve. So children don't know that they can grieve for things if there's no adults around them, letting them know that it's okay. They just hold it all in. They think they're the only ones who are feeling this way, and they don't want to upset the other adults around them. They're afraid of being disloyal to the people who are caring for them now. And this is a very tender and sensitive topic. And so they need to hear it from us that it's okay to be sad about these things. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to feel all the emotions that they're having, and letting them know that you're going to be there for them no matter what, and that you'll sit through it with them, and that their grief may never end. Our grief doesn't go away when we lose people, even to death. It doesn't go away. I lost my mom when I was 26. And that was many years ago. And I still long for her. I still have a connection to her emotionally. Just because people are physically gone doesn't mean our emotional relationships end. So giving them permission to grieve for as long as they need to is a gift that you can give a child. Help them redefine what their family means now. So maybe family isn't me, mom and dad, but maybe family now includes part of their community. Maybe it's their teacher, maybe it's a new neighbor, maybe it's a new friend, but help them widen their concept of what family means. Family doesn't have to just be biological. Family can be chosen, can be your chosen family. So help them think about who are the people in my life who mean most to me. You can even make a diagram or make a list, make some kind of drawing to help them identify the different people around them who are in their circle of support, and let them know that can be considered family too. Just because you don't have a biological parent in your life doesn't mean that you can't feel connected to other people in a familial relationship. And also, the reason I have this picture of the little girl blowing out the candle here probably didn't make sense till I'm saying this now, but be conscious of grief during celebrations and birthdays and holidays. We tend to think that if children aren't talking about something, that they're not thinking about it. And that couldn't be further from the truth. What we know is that children, even if they aren't talking about what's happened, they are thinking about it. They are having all the feelings. They're just internally dealing with them. And so when we just pretend that their birthday is the happiest day ever, and we don't mention or notice the grief that goes along with that, and the fact that they may not have a connection to their birth or biological parents, then we're missing an entire portion of who they are. A birthday is not just a celebration when you've had this kind of loss. There is grief that will always be attached to the celebrations in their life, because at every celebration, they're still going to wish that person was there. It's important to be very aware that Celebrations, holidays, and birthdays can bring up these feelings of grief and help them acknowledge both. You are really excited about your birthday coming up, but I bet maybe there's a part of you that's sad your mom can't be here, or your dad can't be here, or your aunt can't be here, or whoever it is who's special to them. I tend to say mom and dad because that just makes it easier, but this could be anybody. It doesn't have to just be a mom or dad. So we also want to keep our expectations reasonable. We can't expect children to just get over these things quickly and move on. These are things that will stay with them throughout their lifetime if it's been significant and has impacted them. And so we want to keep our expectations, especially around holidays and celebrations, very reasonable. Don't expect things to go perfectly. They probably won't. And set that bar a little bit lower, and that way you don't set yourself up for a lot of disappointment. I've seen that happen a lot, where families are like, try to throw some big celebration and the child's having a meltdown that day, and then they're frustrated because things didn't turn out how they wanted them to turn out. And I get that. As a mom, I have been there. I've been there. It's like always sometimes the worst timing when these things happen, but know that there could be something deeper going on there. Maybe there's that grief that's not being acknowledged. It's bringing up big emotions. And then we can also model our own healthy responses to loss. For example, when my dog passed away back in September, she was my first baby, and she was 16 years old and lived a very long, beautiful life. But my first instinct was to not let my daughter, who's 7, be part of that experience. I didn't want to tell her. We didn't want to tell her. And we wanted to just what would you say? I'm trying to think of the word. We had to have her put down, and because she was very unhealthy at that point, and we didn't want her to be a part of that, but we changed our minds and we decided that we wanted to model a healthy response to loss. And so we were able to include her in that process in an age appropriate way. She wasn't there at the moment the dog died or anything, but she was able to say goodbye. And then we spent some time outside together. And then we were able to see her after she died and say goodbye again. And I let her be part of all of that grief. I let her see us cry. We all cried together because she needs a model for how to grieve. Children don't know how to grieve unless they see us do it. And so it's okay for them to be a part of those processes, and it's okay to grieve and to cry with them. Of course, you never want to lean on a child for emotional support. You need to have your own adults to help you through whatever grief you're experiencing, but showing emotion and modeling what it's like to feel sad and to grieve is also very important. Some more ways we can help children connect are through maybe life books that they've created. So this is like a story of their life so that they can have a beginning, a middle, and a future. And so we can help them create the story. If there's missing pieces to their story, there's missing information that they don't know, finding that information for them and helping them have a cohesive narrative of where they've been and who's been in their life and what's happened can be very grounding and settling for them when there's so much uncertainty circling around. One of the things you can do is family search and engagement work. There's lots of ways to do this nowadays. I actually work for a organization, a nonprofit called Connect Our Kids. If you know me, you probably know that I talk about them quite a bit, but what they do is they offer free family search and engagement technology to help people who have been disconnected and lost from family members reconnect and start to rebuild their relationship again. So it's definitely, there's tools out there that you can access to help and find information. Maybe it's not the person themselves, but maybe you find someone else in the family who knows some information about their mom or dad or aunt or uncle or whoever might be important to them. Another activity you can do is create a loss box, which is a box of things that the child identifies the person with. So maybe it's their favorite perfume, or maybe it's an item that was given to them by the person, or maybe it's a picture of them together, just a box and a special place to keep all the things that remind them of that person. And when they're feeling sad and they're feeling like they're missing that person, they can go to the box and spend some time with those things and help them feel a connection to the person who's missing. Journaling is another way for older children, obviously not little ones who can't write, but children who are old enough to write and to journal about their lives, journaling can be a great way and a safe, private way for them to express themselves and have a place to unleash some of the sadness that they're feeling. Spending time with animals in nature are incredibly comforting and soothing. If they are comfortable with animals and in nature, those are two ways that we can create connection and attachment to something that might feel safer than connecting to a human. So they may have learned that getting attached to humans is really unsafe and really disappointing, and they could be fearful of rejection or abandonment. But animals have a way of being less of a threat. And so this could be a building block, as well as nature too, time in nature. These can be building blocks to future relationship with adults that are healthy. Creating a memorial garden is another way to help them have a place to put their grief and feel connected to somebody. It could be as simple as some flowers that you plant outside with a little sign about what that garden means to the person. Or I've seen people create like rock gardens where they take like really smooth rocks and they paint them and they put little sayings on there, and they draw or paint things on the rocks that symbolize the relationship they had with the person. And then when they're feeling sad, they go and they visit the memorial garden or the rock garden. There's things that we can do to help them ritualize their grief. And then lighting a candle. You could light a candle each night to signify the loss of the person or the person who's missing. You could do it once a week. You could light an extra candle at the birthday celebration for the person who's missing. So there's lots of ways that you can use lighting a candle that can feel like ceremonial and a nice ritual to help them contain some of their grief and acknowledge it. Eventually, and it takes a lot of time, and this is obviously not the first skill or strategy to go with, but eventually over time, many people end up finding meaning in this type of loss. So again, when it's the acute stages and it's fresh and new, this might not be helpful, but eventually there will be a time when they find meaning in the loss, or might be able to. The important part is that it's self-directed. So it's never saying, hey, you went through this, but look what the silver lining is. Oh yes, you lost your mom, your relationship with your mom, but you gained this. That's not helpful, minimizing their loss. So we don't want that to take place when we're trying to find meaning, but we can let it be self-directed. And some ways we can do that are, they may have an inner desire to give back to others who have been in their situation. They may be interested in finding a support group of other peers who have been through something similar, which I think is also really important to consider, because this can be a very isolating experience. When you realize that you're not alone and you have peers, then you also it can help you process through what you've experienced. Maybe they create art from the pain. Maybe they write songs. Maybe they write poetry. Maybe they paint something, but an outward expression of their ambiguous loss can be incredibly healing. And then helping them understand what they do know about their family is another way. So saying, help me understand, what do you know about your family, is a great way to hold on to pieces of them and respect what they had and what they didn't have, and make space for them to express themselves. Other ways is through their family history and culture. So again, if you don't know a lot about their family history or culture, you can research and find out some things online. You'd be surprised what you can find. You might be able to visit a special location. I had a client, and this is a story I share, where we didn't have hardly any information about the child's background, but we did know the hospital she was born in, and we were able to go and visit that hospital where she was born. And just having that information was so incredibly powerful and part of her healing journey. Of course, it didn't fix everything, right? But it gave her something to say, at least I know where I was born. You can discuss the positive qualities of the people in their lives and try and stay neutral about any of the negative. Children internalize the words and descriptions that they hear about their biological parents, and they think, if they're bad, I must be bad too. And so it's important to be positive, or at least stay neutral. And then letting them know the truth in age-appropriate terms. So keeping secrets and not being honest is always a direct way to break down more trust when the trust in the child has already been broken. So it's important that we be honest. We're almost towards the end, so I'm going to fly through a couple of these, but the longer the ambiguous loss goes on, obviously, the more intense it becomes. These longer types of losses are very distressing for the child. Expecting the child not to think about it, expecting the child to come to you and talk about it, and shaming their feelings, telling them they should be over it, or that big boys, big girls don't cry, we need to move on. Minimizing and shaming them for how they're feeling is definitely going to make it worse. The key takeaway here, and I'm so grateful for everyone who's been here with me for this time today. The key takeaway is that we can't heal what we don't acknowledge. When ambiguous loss is validated, the healing process can emerge. And I just want you all to know that you can do this. You can do this work. You can help a child heal. They may never get to a fully healed place. I don't think any of us do. I certainly haven't. But you can be part of that journey with them and get them to a place where they can live a full and successful life. Be that one person and help them recognize these losses. A little bit about my book, a little plug here, a little shameless plug, but if you're looking for a children's book about ambiguous loss, you can find mine on Amazon. It's Grand Family for Sullivan, and I'd love for you to have a copy. And so if you're interested, check it out over there and on Amazon, or you can find it on my website, which is bethtyson.com. And again, here's my contact information for anyone who wants to know more. So I thank you all for being here today. I am going to look in the chat. I have a few minutes to stay on if anybody wants to chat a little bit more, but I know most people probably have to get going. Oh, good. I'm getting some nice comments here. Thank you all so much. I'll definitely print out the chat and try and get back to you if there's any questions in here via email, because I have your emails now. And the email registering for the event also signs you up for my free newsletter that I often talk about these topics and also have free events scheduled in there. So it will add you to that. You can subscribe at any time if you don't want to be part of that list, but registering for the meeting gave you that little bonus of staying in touch and getting to learn more about these topics. And yeah, looks like a lot of good comments. Everybody's saying thank you. And yes, drawing pictures can be a good alternative for children who are too young to journal. That's a great recommendation. Therapeutic practices or art practices. Yeah, play therapy would be really helpful for children. EMDR therapy is another one that's really helpful for children, teens, young adults, pretty much anyone. I'm a certified EMDR practitioner, and it's mind-blowing the positive impact it can have. And let's see, Building Bridges by Julie Lowe has some great therapy ideas that can be applied with ambiguous loss. That was a recommendation from Kim Parrish. Thank you, Kim, if you're still here. And let's see, memorial bracelets, keychains. Yes, those are all beads to represent different loved ones who have gone. All great suggestions. Carla saying hi, if you're still here. Hi, Carla. I know you always attend my events. I'm thankful you were here. Hannah said it's so hard sometimes to stay neutral when you want to protect the child. And I totally get that. It is very difficult to stay neutral when we are emotionally trying to protect a child who seems to be getting hurt over and over again unnecessarily. And I get that. It is very hard. So I see you and I hear you and I'm with you, but I'm glad that you're practicing on getting better at it, because they really do internalize those messages and think that it's about them. They're very egocentric, these little people. And if they hear bad things about themselves, they tend to believe that they must also have something wrong with them. Someone else suggested The Invisible String. Love that book. The author actually gave me an endorsement on the back of my book. And so I love her and I love her work. So yes, big shout out to The Invisible String children's book if you are looking for one about loss. Thank you all for being here. It looks like everyone enjoyed it, and I hope that I get to see you all again. So yeah, I'm just looking at these last few chats. Couple more, but I will respond to them. I'll print them out and respond to them in email Or you can also email me if I didn't get a chance to answer your question. My email is beth@bethtyson.com. Very simple. So you should be able to find me. Thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate you caring so much about children in your lives. And just know that you can be that one person. Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Beth Tyson. Welcome to my webinar on helping children live with ambiguous loss. Today, you'll be learning what ambiguous loss is and how to help the children that you know who are struggling to cope with it. I'm the owner of Beth Tyson Trauma Consulting, and a great way to learn more about me is to visit my website, bethtyson.com. Before we get started, there's a few things I'd like to share with you. The content and the video of this presentation is protected by copyright law, and there is no, it is not legal to record or recreate or redistribute any of this material without my written permission. So just make sure that you're following those guidelines, and if you have questions, feel free to email me at beth@bethtyson.com. This is also not a substitute for professional mental health advice or guidance in any way, and this presentation is for educational purposes only. If you or a child you know needs help or is in crisis, you can contact the new crisis hotline at 988, and this is available to you via text or call for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. By taking this webinar, you agree that I'm acting as a trainer and an educator, and I'm not giving medical, legal, or financial or spiritual advice of any kind. So those are just a few things I like to remind people of before we get started today. As I mentioned before, I am a childhood trauma consultant. I'm also a former trauma therapist who worked with children in foster, kinship, and adoptive families. Oftentimes, these children were on the verge of being removed from their homes due to behavioral issues. And I found that the most powerful impact I made and the most change I was able to see in the families was when I helped the adults understand childhood trauma and how they could parent from a trauma-informed lens. I decided to take that knowledge and all that great experience that I gained and turn it into a consulting business where I teach others and educate and guide organizations and other adults on how to be trauma responsive, trauma aware, and healing centered. I'm also a 3-time best-selling author, which sounds weird to even say, but I wrote a children's book called A Grand Family for Sullivan, and you can find it on Amazon or my website. And there's also 2 other books that I was a co-author of. So I co-authored a book called Where Social Work Can Lead You. It's about the journeys into, out of, and around social work careers. And it's great for anyone who's interested in going into social work, or social work students who want to know more about the career options that they have. I'm also a CASA advisory board member, and I'm a volunteer for them as well in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. And I'm a HEAL PA co-chair of the child abuse prevention team with my lovely co-chair, Leslie Davila. So those are just a few of the things I do in my free time. But when I'm not doing that, I love to do this. I love to teach others about children's mental health, grief, loss, and trauma, because I truly believe it's where we can make the most impact in the world. Once we can begin to heal from the pain that we've experienced in early childhood, then we can begin to grow and thrive and succeed as healthy adults. I encourage you to take a picture of this slide if you want to stay in touch with me after watching this webinar. My email is there, as well as my website and my Facebook group, Emoda Minds. My LinkedIn page, Beth Tyson, I'm very active there, have over 10,000 followers. And my Facebook business page, Beth Tyson Trauma Consulting. I also have over 10,000 followers there, and which is remarkable for me to even hear myself say, but I am very proud of the work and the information that I share there. And so I hope you'll hop over and visit me there. I'd love to stay in touch. Today's agenda will be going over how to understand ambiguous loss. I mean, this word is very unusual for a lot of people, and I wouldn't be surprised if you've never heard the term ambiguous loss. It's not something that most people ever come across or hear about unless they're in the field of loss and grief. And it's a word that can give us a lot of comfort and validation for what we experience during this type of loss. We'll also talk about the impact it makes on our bodies, our minds, our hearts, and our souls. And we'll talk about how we support children with ambiguous loss, a very difficult situation for young people to be in. It's a sense of just feeling completely out of control and uncertain about the loved ones in your lives and those special people, places, and things that you can't reach or are not available to you or to the child. So what is ambiguous loss? It's any loss that is unresolved, uncertain, and ongoing. So this is a very complicated type of loss. And Pauline Boss, who is the originator of the concept, says that it's the most traumatic type of grief we can experience as a human because of the uncertainty, because of the lack of social recognition, and because of the lack of closure around these types of losses. It's also a framework for understanding grief that doesn't involve death. So we're not talking about physical death. We're talking about losses where a person is still here on this planet, but is either physically or emotionally unable to be present with you or the child. And this experience of ambiguous loss is not pathological. It's not a diagnosis either. It is a normal human response to overwhelming events. So everything we talk about today will be an adaptive response to overwhelming situations. And there is nothing wrong with you or the child for feeling what they're feeling and for having these responses. It's literally a reaction to something that is totally out of their control. There are two types of ambiguous loss. The first type is a physical absence with a psychological presence. That might be, like I mentioned here in parentheses, residents. What I mean there is like people who live in any type of residential facility for children who are in foster care, for people who are living in separation from their biological family members in some way, physically. That could be a group home or a foster home. And what this means is that the person is physically absent from the person's life or the child's life, but is still very much psychologically present in the child's life. So the child is still thinking about them, still wondering about them, still worrying about them, and still caring about them. They just don't have any access to their physical relationship, meaning mom or dad or whoever it might be that they're missing isn't spending time with them in proximity to themselves. You know, they're not having that time of face-to-face connection. Type 2 is a psychological absence with a physical presence. So this might look like a family where the parent or parents are addicted to substances. So they are physically in the home with the child or children, but they are mentally, emotionally, and psychologically absent because when they're using, they aren't able to be present and connecting on an emotional level in the way that a child needs and deserves. So those are the two types that we will focus on today, and that Pauline Boss has explained to us as the definition of ambiguous loss. Some everyday types of ambiguous loss. Okay, I think I can stop there and then merge this video into the other Zoom video. Thank you.